So why should we tell a country to support democracy as a system when we didn't support democracy in earlier stages of our development? That's a very good question. Why should we tell a country to respect human rights when we didn't in an earlier stage in our development? Why should we tell a country not to engage in slavery when we didn't do that at an earlier stage of development? That's a hard argument to swallow, right? It doesn't feel good. Look, I completely understand that it is actually not fashionable to take this side of the argument. But at the same time, the notion of by the people and for the people intrinsically feels right to us. Running a country, having that kind of power, being invested in anyone but us, is problematic. We don't trust anyone with that sort of power, except maybe the Canadians. We don't trust individuals to run it without checks and balances, without legitimacy, without the ability to throw them out if they do a bad job, or when they appoint their son, since it's rarely their daughter. We don't like it. That's one reason. I think that we should pay attention to what we think deep down on that. Second point, to Martin, Russian authoritarianism. No question, Yeltsin came in, short-term efforts at democracy failed. I'm sure we all agree that Putin's authoritarianism has been much better for Russia, right? It's not true. Putin's very powerful, he's very rich. He uses every mode of conveyance I've ever seen in my life, any transport, any animal. He's all over it. He looks good to some people. But the fact is that he's enriched himself on the backs of, at the expense of the Russian people. The brain drain has been phenomenal. The capital flight has been huge. Egypt democracy, what a failure. There was no democracy in Egypt. The military ran the country. We had an Arab Spring. Everyone got excited. How wonderful. The military never went anywhere. They still controlled the country. Arab monarchies, how do we think they work? Do we think they'd be better off if there was actually more representation? How would women be treated in those Arab monarchies? A little better? I think so. Do we like that? Sure. Should we be telling them what to do with women? What do you think the Arab women would say? I know what they'd say. They'd like a different system. That's not the West shoving it down their throat. I hate the idea of American exceptionalism. I don't want to tell people how to run their system. Look at the way we run our system. Isn't it a disaster? The fact that the U.S. government today is less popular does not mean that democracy is less popular in America. It actually means that people want to return to democracy in America. I completely agree with Martin that China is the interesting case here, right? The Arab states are not. Russia is not. It's very clear in so many countries of the world that they would be run better for their people if there was more democracy and accountability. It's very clear, right? In China, for 35 years, they've been growing at, on average, 10% a year. And the world's never seen that. 1.3 billion people, that's very impressive. But what interests me in China is that they understand that that's not sustainable. If they don't have the ability to tell their people that there's a reason that you vote for us besides throwing you 10% growth every year, that they're in very serious trouble. Because you know what happens in an authoritarian regime when you lose power? They don't just vote you out. It's worse than that. The Chinese government, the most successful authoritarian revolution and experiment that the world has ever seen over 35 years, even they understand that if they don't create a more democratic system, they're gone too. If they recognize it, what does it mean for the rest of us? Thank you very much.
Ian Bremmer, thank you very much indeed. Now, our second final speaker For the motion, Rosemary Hollis, Professor of Middle East Studies and expert on conflict and security in the region, also Director of the Olive Tree Scholarship Programme at City University here in London. Please welcome Rosemary Hollis.
A lot of nonsense is talked about democracy, and mostly by people who live in relatively rich Western democracies, who attribute their comparative wealth and well-being to, of course, first, their own hard work, second, their liberal capitalist system, and thirdly, their democratic form of government. In other words, the benefits of democracy are relative. It depends on who you are, where you are in the global system, how wealthy your state is compared to others, and where you are in the evolution of your own political system. Now, first, looking at who you are. Supposing you are a member of a minority community, an ethnic or religious minority, for example, a Basque separatist in Spain, a Jew in Nazi Germany, a Turk in Germany. How well will majority rule protect you? Democracy does not automatically do so. Your safety depends on the values espoused by the government of the day. And a populist government may win election by playing to majority prejudices at the expense of the minorities. Why else would religious minority communities sometimes feel safer under dictatorial rule than majority rule? The benefits of democracy all depend whether you draw the lines on the map around the democracy concerned. For ordinary Indians who do have a democracy and Chinese who do not, what matters is that their government is strong enough to defend their national corner. They're not operating in a vacuum, democracy or otherwise. Thus, whether they have a say in the composition of their government is less relevant to their chances of prosperity than the ability of their government to exercise leverage at the international level. Suppose you live in a small, underdeveloped country, dependent on investment and aid from the developed world for you to achieve a halfway decent standard of living and gainful employment. Whether elected or not, your government will have to bow to the dictates of multinationals and international financial institutions whose priorities are, respectively, profits and loan repayments, not your well-being. Your democracy is meaningless when your government has no real power. In any case, politicians are masters at managing national perceptions, manufacturing consent, even. And I contend the Western democracies mistake their moral authority at home as a license to tell other people how they should govern themselves. But their own systems are non-exportable. Do not, please, ladies and gentlemen, equate the word democracy with what makes you feel good here. Because it cannot work without the comparative economic advantages that are enjoyed here. Thank you.